Today we want to focus on just some key items in terms of the developments that have been occurring within the sector since we last spoke. And while I know you may have a number of other questions, we'll try to see how much we can pack into the limited time that we have. First of all, I want to start with the approval of the LISA Phase 2 development plan. LISA Phase 2 field development plan was approved by our minister on Monday, the 29th of April, 2019. The approval is for the second phase of development on the LISA field. The Department of Energy and the Guyana Geology and Mines Commission Petroleum Division, together with its external consultant Bayphase, conducted an in-depth review of the LISA Phase 2 field development plan submitted by Exxon Exploration and Production Guyana Limited. The development plan basically will utilize a development concept similar to the LISA Phase 1, where it will be utilizing subsea wells and a floating production storage and offloading vessel. It will produce up to 220,000 barrels of oil per day with a total of 6 drill centers planned, as well as approximately 30 wells, including 50 for production purposes, 9 water injection, and 6 gas injection wells. The Phase 2 startup is expected in mid-2022 and is projected to develop approximately 600 million barrels of oil. The FPSO named the LISA Unity will process, store, and offload oil to oil tankers for transport to market. The approval is subject to a number of conditions and confirmatory studies. Some of the more important conditions relate to: 1, the establishment of a regional capping stack or other solution to ensure that a capping stack can be deployed within 5 days of a well control event with loss of containment. 2, improving the targeted availability of the overall production system of the LISA Phase 2 FPSO to between 98% and 99%. 3, identifying potential cost-saving synergies between LISA Phase 1 and Phase 2. 4, the Stabroek partners entering into a decommissioning security agreement. 5, having EEPGL conduct annual third-party auditing on their drilling operations that will be consistent with good international oil field practice and its own operations integrity management system. And lastly, that the EEPGL shall follow the required practice in the U.S. Gulf of Mexico in calculating the worst-case discharge, and to validate the assumptions and calculations by obtaining an independent assessment to develop an estimate of the flow that would result from an open hole well control event with loss of containment. This independent assessment will then be used as the basis for oil spill response plan and oil spill modeling. Insurance. The department has set the stage, as we have constantly been reiterating, by ruling out self-insurance and enforcing insurance compliant with Guyanese law. We have worked together with the governor of the Bank of Guyana, the Guyana insurance community, inclusive of the Insurance Association of Guyana, and the Environmental Protection Agency, to create an environment where all operators, including the Stabroek operator, will source compliant insurance and demonstrate insurance quantums and terms through third-party risk assessors. Farm-ins. The government of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, via the minister responsible for petroleum, approved on April 30th, 2019, the farm-in joint venture agreement between CGX Energy Inc. and Frontiera Energy Corporation, covering 2 shallow water offshore petroleum prospecting licenses. These are in the Quarantine and Demerara blocks. CGX is planning to drill 1 well in 2019 using a jackup rig. Institutional strengthening. The DE continues to advance with the process of strengthening its capacity through, inter alia, the continued recruitment of expertise of both Guyanese and advisors, securing funding and expertise to build out its structure, and developing a web presence. In this vein, with the recently signed World Bank loan for $20 million US, the DE is aiming to recruit the following skills between May and July of this year. Some of you would have seen the ads already placed. They include the Petroleum Development Advisor, the Crude Marketing Advisor, the Natural Gas Negotiations Advisor, Oil and Gas Commercial Specialist, a specialist to conduct a needs assessment for the Petroleum Commission, an accounting specialist, legal advisory services, given that the diagnostic analysis draft report is now with the department, as well as the recruitment of local staff, ads which were placed in the daily newspapers, as well as on our Facebook page and the MOTP website. The department is also working with the Inter-American Development Bank to recruit some additional advisory services to ensure production sharing agreement contract administration processes are created and embedded within the department, and a robust gas master plan is developed. Just 2 other small items before we open for questions. And one deals with the cost recovery audit, which procurement process is just nearing completion, and we're hoping that the consultant will be in place by mid-June of this year. And the local content policy, which draft report is currently with us, and we are looking towards possibly the ending of June for the completion of that consultancy, given the consultations necessary before that policy is finalized. I thank you, and we now open for questions.
Okay. Kiana Wilberg, Kite News. Good afternoon, sir. As it relates to your statement on the local content policy, could you say whether after the finalization of the policy, if there's going to be a consultation round, when can we expect that? And there have been some concerns about the fact that an ExxonMobil specialist, Mr. Warner, Michael Warner, is the one leading the review of the document. Could you say whether the Energy Department is concerned about this in terms of ensuring that the provisions are in keeping with the best interest of the country?
Okay, let me first say that he's not an ExxonMobil specialist. He's a local content specialist whose expertise have been used by a multiplicity of entities, inclusive of ExxonMobil. Guyana is utilizing his services, and we have hired him based on a competitive process where, like other consultants, he had the opportunity to have his CV submitted to us. It was sent to the World Bank, who's financing this project, and we are confident that we are currently getting value for money. With regards to the issue on consultation, yes, embedded within his contract, even before the document is finalized, that draft will go out for consultations with the private sector and other stakeholders. I should say, however, that the private sector has asked, since we've had multiple consultations before, that this process not be lengthy, but we seek to condense it so that we can move towards finalization.
Marcel Thomas, the Starbuck News. Dr. Bino, recently we saw that Petrobras officials would have given government a document on, I think it's a 5-year plan or oil and gas plan for the sector. I wanted to know if we had reached out to, we meaning government, had reached out to Brazil for their input, and what happens with that document now? And my other question is, we haven't heard from the Department of Energy since the issue with Minister Hughes' company providing services for the DOE and under what circumstances. If you can address that, please.
Okay. Again, with regards to Petrobras, yes, the government of Guyana reached out to Petrobras. We utilized our ambassador in Brazil, Ambassador George Talbot, and this was an official visit that came through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have identified at least 7 potential areas in which we could collaborate going forward. Petrobras indicated that for this current visit, they wanted to focus on 2, which largely centered around issues related to licensing round and their own expertise in deep water exploration. So those were the 2 main issues around which the discussions were held. With regards to the issue on Minister Hughes, this forum, let me clarify. The department is a nascent department. We utilize the procurement processes within the Ministry of the Presidency. My understanding is, and it still remains, that the department went for an individual or requested an individual. It wasn't asking for a firm. To the extent that a firm subsequently was contracted, it's somehow not where we want it to go. The one issue maybe that the department can be accused of is possibly not doing sufficient due diligence. But personally, from where I sit as director, I welcome any possible investigation of any sort that persons may feel are necessary to clear the air in terms of whether there were any nefarious activities or whether it was a case of favoritism. So, in short, I don't think we as a department have anything to hide. I know, yes, we are new. I said to you guys before, there may be errors made, but we are conscious of the fact that an error is only an error or a mistake is only a mistake if one doesn't learn from it. What we have learned is that we need to do greater due diligence in whatever we do.
Good afternoon, Dr. Bino. Dinesh Sharma from the Starbuck News. At your last press conference, you had said that the completion of a legal review and gap analysis would have allowed for the drafting of replacement or supplementary legislation. Could you say what part of the process that is right now, and possibly if you can point out some of the possible draft legislation?
Yes, as I indicated in my brief, one of the things that we have in our possession at this point in time is that draft gap analysis and diagnostic review. That has to go through the process of us speaking to other partners as well, because it doesn't only impact the department, it impacts a number of other departments and stakeholders. It is because of that review that you would see us now advertising for legal advisory services, because that review is expected to point the way in terms of what needs to be repealed and replaced, what needs to be amended, what needs to be made more contextually relevant to the realities that we face today. I think we have been on record as indicating, for example, that the primary legislation, which is the 1986 Exploration and Production Act, is silent, for example, with regards to issues on downstream activities. It also requires enhancement with regards to decommissioning and local content. So these are all areas that we'll be looking at. Once those things are then put in place, we then move towards issues of the Petroleum Commission bill that you would have recognized we have put in abeyance until the primary legislation is in place.
Raghavir Prime News. Dr. Bino, just for clarity with the video mega issue, why go for an individual when there is a tendering process of which MOTP is no stranger to? And sir, could you say what has been done so far to activate the Sovereign Wealth Fund?
The last one is easy. Apart from the fact that the Sovereign Wealth Fund was assented to, that's within the purview of the Ministry of Finance, so it would be necessary to have that discussion with the Ministry of Finance.
Have you been updated by them in any way on
Well, we continue to have engagements, yes. For example, as I said here at this forum before, there is an interministerial technical committee on petroleum. So we do communicate, we do have discussions. The framework is in place. Under the same World Bank project, there will be further assistance being provided to enhance the implementation capacity of the committee that is to manage the fund. So there are things happening behind the scenes that we're working on. So it's not as though nothing is happening where that is concerned. But the World Bank project helped us to unlock some necessary resources to put further systems in place so that what is there is robust and can stand up to scrutiny going forward.
Is there a time frame at this point in time?
I am not in a position to speak to that, no. Okay?
The video mega question.
Yes.
And this person.
Oh, yes. I believe in candor. And I think all of you in the room here would have seen us advertising for a communications forum some time back. In fact, we were on record as indicating that this was the direction in which we were going. Because we do believe what the department requires is a communication strategy that deals holistically with communication matters. What we have sought to do, as you would have noted as well in the interim, is that we have taken some small steps in treating with getting the messaging out to the Guyanese populace in terms of what is necessary as we prepare for force oil. So, for example, even in the absence of us completing our website, we have established a web presence through our Facebook page. We have sought to pursue issues related to the art competition and an intern program, and all of these are small steps which hopefully once the firm is in place, that holistic communication strategy can be addressed. I'm saying all of that to say the PSAs are no different. They're just expected to be a short-term fix or a short-term plug until that more comprehensive strategy is developed. It is not, as was inaccurately reported, a multi-million-dollar project. This was largely just a small project for an individual, which is why we were going for an individual rather than a firm. The other issue that one needs to be taking on the table is the consideration in terms of what would it have costed us to go for a firm as against an individual. It would have cost significantly more to do 3 PSAs for television purposes and 3 for radio. So there was nothing more than us trying to ensure that we are getting the messaging out to the Guyanese public. That was all it was.
And let me just clarify, Mr. Lancaster applied to this advertisement?
There was no advertisement placed. Because of the size of the contract, 3 CVs are allowed.
Dr. Bino, good day. I have 3 questions. The Department of Energy has been meeting with a number of young people, encouraging them to tap into the oil and gas sector. But what has the government been doing in terms of building the capacity of, such as the Crude Training College and the Government Technical Institute, to actually prepare them to meet the demands of the oil and gas sector? And the other question, I know at the last press conference you spoke about developing a model production sharing agreement. Can you give us an update on that? And I can't remember the third question.
That's fine. Government continues to offer assistance in a multiplicity of ways. In fact, I don't see a dichotomy between the Department of Energy and the Government of Guyana. We are one and the same. Part of what we're doing here is seeking not only to get the messaging out, but multiple persons come through our offices on a daily basis. What we've been trying to do is to establish collaboration and have a coherent strategy in terms of what we're doing. So firstly, a needs assessment was completed in which it focused heavily on the TVET institutions and what is required within that sector. Since that time, we've been working very closely with the TVET Council, Mr. Scott in particular, and those entities that have been coming trying to set up parallel structures, we've been encouraging them to partner with the TVET institution. Currently on the table is for us to pursue 2 pilots of those TVET institutions to see how they will perform before we take a more holistic strategy. University of Guyana, you'd be aware, has recently launched their own petroleum program. We are also working with the Board of Industrial Training, and one must recall that the Public Service Ministry still do provide opportunities for Guyana to build its capacity as we move towards the oil and gas sector. We have received training as well from the government of Mexico, where some of our staff members' capacities are being built. And there are other areas which I can't remember every one off the top of my head, but these are areas in which we are moving.
Update on the PSC.
Yes. As we indicated, that was largely what we consider a best practice template. In other words, the provisions therein are very strong, and they will likely be could likely be the best PSA ever. Would it, however, encourage investments into Guyana? So what we are doing now is that we're about to go around to share that with other entities, because, for example, if you look at the fiscal clauses therein, those will have to be reviewed by GRA and the Ministry of Finance. Those are not things that we can sit within the department and pronounce upon. So there will be need for others to have their inputs and for us to then refine that best practice PSA before we go to another licensing round. But as we have been on record as indicating, a new licensing round is not expected maybe until Q1 of 2020, possibly Q2, because of what we need to have in place before we move to another licensing round.
Do you remember the other question, or should I ask?
With the efforts being undertaken by the Department of Energy so far and within the coming months, do you, in your humble opinion, do you feel that Guyana is ready to meet the demands of first oil?
Well, it depends on how you define ready. Mm-hmm. If you mean that everything will be in place, all your I's would be dotted and T's crossed, I would say no. But would we have a workable framework that would allow us to ensure that we reduce value leakage and that optimum returns are coming to Guyana? And in my humble opinion, I will say yes.
All right. My name is Alva Solomon from the Guyana Chronicle. I have a question on local content. At the last press conference, you had mentioned that there were some areas of improvement which were needed in the local content plans of operations here. Could you say what are those areas of improvement?
I'm not sure I follow you completely, but what we have been working with the operators to do is to ensure that we have greater granularity in terms of the presentation of their plans. So moving from that aggregated level, that we have a better understanding who exactly they're targeting, at what specific occupational levels, over what period, how that information is being reported. Similarly, what we have seen in the past is that the reporting has been at a very first order level. So persons report only in terms of maybe a contract that is signed, and there isn't much drilling down to the second, third, or the multipliers. Those are all important for us to capture, because my pet story is that we see NABI, for example, signing a contract to build the EM headquarters. What is often captured is only the contract value that goes to NABI. We're not capturing, for example, how many truck drivers NABI would employ to bring sand, who's bringing stone, who's bringing cement, who's bringing steel. These things are often not captured, so as a result, the information remains at a very high level, and we're not drilling down. So that kind of multiplier we also need to be see coming through.
Does that answer your question? Piano. Dr. Bino, just a few questions. Could you provide an update on the National Oil Spill Plan, where that is at this point? Secondly, could you say how your staff has improved, if you've taken on more individuals, and in what area? Where do you need the most help? If you can provide answers on that. Also, could you say if the Department of Energy has been able to activate any help from the MOU Guyana signed with Trinidad and Tobago? In addition to that, the PSA that we have does not address issues of metered oil. Could you say if the best practice template will look at that?
That's it, Kia?
For now.
Okay, if I may, in terms of oil spills, as you know, the entity that is responsible for that is the CDC, the Civil Defense Commission. But we have been partnering with the CDC to provide the kinds of technical assistance and point them to where that technical assistance can ultimately be garnered. We have advanced some work under that plan, but we continue to require further assistance. As you may recall, we had a workshop not so long ago that aimed at enhancing the risk management framework under which that plan will be couched. So yes, we have made some advances. In fact, we have been engaging as well with the U.S. Embassy here to see what kinds of support they may be able to provide through the State Department and the U.S. Coast Guard, as well as FEMA, who would have had years of experience in this particular area. In terms of staffing, yes, we have, as you would have seen, we advertised recently for a number of new positions. What I can say is that that has taken us much longer than we had anticipated because of the volumes that we received, the volumes of applicants that we received. We are currently going through the process, and you ask, well, what are the critical areas? I say all the areas are critical at this stage. So I will not sit here and point out one being more critical than the other. Given the fact that it's a new area, it's a new sector, we need to ensure that we are covering the various bases. The MOU, we are waiting on the first meeting. That, as you would recall, may have fallen prey somewhat to the December 21st vote because the minister that was identified to head the executive committee for Guyana was Minister Harmon. And so because he has now resigned as a minister, we have to have a replacement before that first meeting can take place. The members of the working group, those have been identified. And so we're just waiting on that. Just. Yeah.
Oil.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think also just to go back to your question about oil spill planning, whilst the agency responsibility lies with obviously the CDC, because we're working closely together with all agencies which have an interest in contingency planning, what the department can do is to ensure where it has influence and ability we get outcomes. And I think I'd go back to the comments that Mark made about the LISA Phase 2 FDP approval. One of the key or two key areas in there which has an impact on spill contingency planning relates to not only the calculation methodology that we're obliging the operators to use to calculate maximum potential exposure, and the fact that it's got to be verified by third parties, but also that we want to see a regional capping stack solution such that in the ultimate worst case situation, that can be mobilized within 5 days. Now that was a very important finding which came out of the Bay Phase review, and it's one which we've hard-coded into the approval process to get action on. So that will then have knock-on implications for the oil spill planning, because that will have to be assumed as an outcome as well. In your second question regarding metering, I'm a little bit confused. Can you just explain a bit more about that?
Sure. Now, there are several contracts which I've perused, even from Trinidad and Tobago. There's provisions upon provisions with regard to metered oil, the agency that is going to be responsible for this, what happens if there's non-compliance, those sort of issues. There are no provisions where those are concerned in our contract with any of the oil operators. So I wanted to know, going forward, will our best practice PSA take such matters into consideration?
I mean, procedurally, yes, and in terms of the existing arrangements for current blocks, that's agreed between the government and the contractors in terms of doing the crude lifting. The crude lifting agreement is an agreement because the government is also a lifter of crude. We sign on to that as well. That contains all the metering philosophy and the metering checks. Now that document is in an advanced stage of preparation. It's almost complete. What we're going through is a process now of getting the various agencies within Guyana ready for crude lifting, as well as one of the roles which we're going out to tender right now is for the crude marketing advisor, which is to get an entity that can assist us in arranging the marketing arrangements for the government share. But in terms of the accuracy of metering, how you meter, how you corroborate, who checks, that's all contained within the crude lifting agreement. And that will be an agreement that is signed by all parties.
And it will be public?
The agreement is basically the AIPN's standard. There's not an issue to it being public or not. I mean, we're quite happy to make it public. The agreement, if any of you are aware of AIPN, the AIPN publish a lot of master agreements. Most countries around the world use the crude lifting agreement as a standard agreement, and that contains all the fundamental philosophies.
We'll take two last questions. Marcel
Mr. Wilkes, I just wanted clarity on something you just said. You said we're going out for a marketing company. No?
No.
I was thinking of the question with crude, looking at crude prices. No?
We are going for a crude marketing advisor who is going to the department has to put in place preparations for how the government sells its share of the crude. And we will be looking at an entity to provide a service on that basis, on a transparent basis, on basically what's known as a fee for barrel basis. We are tendering for an advisor to assist us in creating that tender document to go out to the market.
Oh, and that process would be finished before the end of the year, so Guyana knows what it does with its share, if it goes to Exxon or if it sells independently.
Guyana will be selling its share independently to get the highest price on international markets.
Oh, and my substantive question, Dr. Bino, you had said, and it's a follow-up to Chance's too, as it pertains to where are we in preparation for first oil. I wanted to know if you believe that overarching legislation, the Petroleum Act, be it amending it or fresh legislation, would that be ready in time for next year?
That's not an easy question for me to answer, simply because it's not only within the purview of the Department of Energy. After this is completed, it has to go to Parliament. And whether there is that resolve to move that through is outside of the control of the Department of Energy. What we need to do is to have the revisions, the replacements completed, and that we have the time to get that done.
And you will get that done in time for Parliament. Don't worry, Parliament.
Department of Energy will get its part done. In fact, as I said to you, and let me reiterate and re-emphasize, and I would ask you again to consult with what is already out there. Hooking back to the question with regards to the crude marketing, not only were those advertised, but the dates for the closure of the advertisements are out there, so that you can see when those people are expected to be in place. Okay? No. The legislation. Again, up on the website right now, you will see us advertising for the legal advisory firm to help us with that revision. So, as I said earlier, the fact that we have nearing the completion of the gap analysis and the diagnostic, it points us in a direction where we ought to go. Just to share off the record, We had a visit recently from, I know I'm with reporters, nothing is off the record. But recently we had a visit from our Mexican friends. And yes, they have more capacity, etc. But they were able to make major legislative and constitutional changes within 1 year. The issue is if there is that political will to get it done. The Department of Energy will get its work done.
So, Dr. Baino, then if I could just ask you to say, what do you imagine a workable framework to be before the next year, before forced on?
Well, for one thing, we will have the commercial section up and running. We will have the major elements of the, or we should have the major elements of the legal framework in place. You know, persons often complain, oh, what's happening with regards to the Petroleum Commission? And if the Petroleum Commission is not in place before forced oil, would the sky cave in? And we're saying not necessarily, because precedent has shown that you've had the Jubilee field in Ghana, for example, that started production even before a Petroleum Commission was in place. Would you like to have it before? Perfect. But if it's not, it doesn't mean that everything grinds to a halt. We have been working very closely with the Petroleum Division at the GGMC, whose own capacities require some amount of enhancement, and they have been performing the role currently of the Petroleum Commission. We've been working closely with the EPA. In fact, you would have seen recently the collaboration with regards to the issuing of their permit for Lisa 2 and us issuing the FDP approval. The point is, bits and pieces are indeed coming together. And through the Interministerial Technical Committee, we are hoping, and more than hoping, we are working to ensure that at least the key elements are there. Another key element, as you asked about earlier, is the crude lifting and marketing plan. Those will already be in place for first oil. Our commercial development specialists would already be in place for first oil. So yes, the major tenets would be there for us to be able to be confident that Guyana will not be involved in value leakage and will be able to optimize the returns coming from the resource.
Could I just ask you quickly, what are you waiting on to go to the new licenses round? Is it finalizing the model PSA? Or could you just clarify that? And who are you reporting to at this point in time? Which minister?
My minister has always been His Excellency, the President.
Okay.
Nothing has changed in that respect until gazetted elsewhere. Okay? At this point in time, with regards to, what was your first question?
The licensing,
Yes.
new licensing.
What we indicated is that we cannot move to licensing round until the legislative framework is in place. Otherwise, you'll be licensing under the old legal framework, of which I've pointed out a number of weaknesses. So we want to get that in place, as well as we have been on record as indicating we also want to encourage further plays in the shallow continental shelf. So one of the things we'll be moving towards is issuing an RFP for companies that can do 2D seismic on the shallow continental shelf to develop data packages which can then be sold. That will take about 10 to 11 months in terms of the shooting and the processing of that data. So all of these pieces need to be in place. So I don't think at this stage Guyana is anxious to be rushing to another licensing round. We have enough to keep us occupied as we move forward to get those pieces in place so that when we move in that direction, we are indeed in extracting the best possible value for Guyana.